All right. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam, ala rasulillah. Um, so yesterday I had put up an article on my Substack, and I was talking about the response to Muslims in particular, and some Muslim organizations, to Elon Musk, of him responding to the crimes that were committed by an individual in Germany, Taleb Abdulmohsen. And it was quite telling, the response that some Muslim organizations were having to Musk, who was essentially saying that, this is what happens when you let, Muslims in the country, and this is what happens when you let, immigrants in the country, and that whole kind of, white supremacist dog whistle, kind of thing. And it was really quite disappointing to see some Muslim organizations going for, the head fake, in which CARE released a statement condemning the attacks. Now, in the article, I had talked about, Edward Said's 1978 work called Orientalism, which is a very well-known work of his that was in some ways a groundbreaking work that tackled things like the gaze, right? The gaze of I hate to use the word oppressor, but certainly those that other you, or those that are in either perceived positions or even legitimate social positions of power. He talked about, how was the Arab and the Muslim conceived, in the mind of the white West, not just of the West, because the West, of course, is not just white, but particularly of the white West, and in fact, the conflation of those two, of Muslim and Arab, always being a kind of grand other. And so Said talked about in his book several things that were, quite stirring and quite provocative. One of them was his idea of essentializing. And so one of the critiques that he made against Orientalism was, or in fact, the way that you could say the way that you even get Orientalism, is by associating everything that a Muslim or an Arab does as being an inevitable expression of Islam, and Islam is an inevitable outgrowth of Arab culture. So they're kind of like a snake eating its own tail. One leads into the other. And so in the case of Abdulmohsen, who for decades apparently has been an avowed atheist, has been very much anti-Islam, who has made attempts to cozy up with Zionist figures or organizations and ideology, and in general has been against Islam. And so he had some sort of kind of twisted activism where he was trying to help particularly Saudi women to escape the country. And so anyway, and the great twist is that when they begin to unpack or attempt to try to explain the motivations, like why would he drive his car into a crowd of people on Christmas, killing some people and injuring many, many others, of course, the kind of white supremacist dog whistle corner of the internet was like, well, of course, this is, there's no need to really explain this anything other than, he's Saudi, he's a Muslim extremist, he's an Arab. These all play into one another. And when the mainstream media, what Elon Musk calls the legacy media, in which, of course, nobody argues that mainstream media is not problematic. It's highly problematic, but it's not only problematic when it comes to reporting on this said issue, right? But he said, well, when you saw a cadre of news outlets saying that, hey, this guy's motivations might be something other than what we think, and that perhaps even in his own words, he was motivated by an anti-Islam rhetoric and his, meaning Abdulmohsen's, perceived Islamization of the West, in particularly Germany, which I guess is where this guy made his home. And so Musk denied these things, saying, no, 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 no. This is his attempt to avoid extradition back to Saudi Arabia, who would, of course, probably execute him on some other related crimes or perhaps for this crime. And so this is all just some grand attempt of Abdulmohsen to play this up. And so even if the person is an atheist, even if they are anti-Islam, because of their Arabness and how these two feed into each other, then essentially Islam is still ultimately sort of like inescapable. Like the fact he cannot escape Islam, even though he has disavowed it publicly and for decades and has been an ardent critic of Islam. According to Musk and those like him, according to the essentializing Orientalist, viewpoint, is that, well, no, that's irrelevant. He's from Saudi, so it's kind of like game, set, match. And so what I found, I didn't find Musk's comments, actually I found them, quite in line with how he is as a person and how he's presented himself, at least to us over the years. So that's actually pretty consistent with him and those, from that point of view. What is also consistently disappointing is Muslim organizations feeling the need to constantly respond to things in a way that it's almost a kind of act of self-criminalization. Why would CARE feel the need to have to respond and say, we condemn this particular act? I mean, does CARE condemn when, somebody shoots up a school, or when somebody else does something that is neither Arab nor Muslim? They don't seem to condemn things. And yet, when this person who is not a Muslim, by his own statements, he's not a Muslim. He's Arab, but he's not a Muslim. Somehow they feel the need to respond to this. And so I think if there were to be perhaps an update, or I don't know, this is something that, Saeed missed in his work, is that, okay, certainly there is the European mind that essentializes the Muslim and the Arab, again, one kind of feeding into the other. But in some ways, there's almost a kind of reverse Orientalism, or a reverse essentializing, or perhaps a self-essentializing, where, you have Muslims, particularly Arabs, that will then respond to these kinds of things as if they're kind of silently confirming, right, exactly what Saeed talked about in Orientalism, as this act of wanting to essentialize everything. So I don't see any need, if this person has disavowed Islam altogether and has spent the better part of 20 years working and campaigning against Islam, then if they go and commit a criminal act, why should I, as a Muslim, feel any need, even if I were an Arab? I mean, I'm not an Arab, right? But even if I were an Arab, why would I feel the need to have to respond to this? This seems, wholly unnecessary. So that's what I wrote about in, my article on the Substack. Again, I just feel like we get into these situations and we in many ways do more harm than good. And I mean, in a rare act of clarity, we can see that the mainstream media, even itself, not because it's somehow siding with Islam or siding with the Muslims. Again, this is where, again, it shows, not only Musk's naivety, like, not that he's simply naive, because he's not. It really shows just how blatantly much of a, well, I won't use the word, but you know where I'm going with it, right? It really blatantly shows what he thinks about Muslims, right? And so if you think that mainstream media has ever been on the side of Islam, then you've got to be going out. In some ways, you and Abdulmohsen probably have more in common than you might at first think, right? In that, in the mind of this Abdulmohsen character, right, like part of what appears to have motivated him is this conspiratorial view that somehow Germany has been taken over by Muslim immigrants, and therefore the only way to deal with that issue, I guess, is apparently to attack the German people. And I'm not making light of people dying. It's just that, if Musk thinks that mainstream media or any component of the West, any of its institutions, including the media or Hollywood, mainstream media, if you think any of that has been somehow overran or overtaken by the Muslims, well, let's just say you probably need to go do your homework. You need to do a bit more homework. So if you have a chance, go up and check it out. And I'm not bashing CARE, just to bash, right? I'm critical of what CARE is doing because I feel that in the long run, not only does this serve no purpose, and it's kind of like a person, pledging their innocence when there's no need to, that only then kind of makes people go, well, I don't know, maybe are you guilty? Did you do something? And I think it steers the energy and, the kind of intellectual capital of the community. It steers it away, and it puts us in, I think, a very poor psychological position of one that's always in a position of apology, running scared. I think in a situation like this, where you have this guy who is clearly, he's claimed his atheism, his anti-Islam status, and his anger at the German people for allowing Muslims to come in. These seem to be at least enough of a motive for why he did what he did. But I feel like, why would he be a concern for us? In that, if a person thinks that there's some grand conspiracy like this guy and like Musk, well then, you're not going to disarm people of their conspiracies. That's something that something else has to happen with that in order for them to, and typically, in my experience in dealing with people who are conspiratorial, and I can be a little bit conspiratorial myself, is that you typically that's a process of self-disarming and self-disavowal. And so, it's kind of like dealing with racism. You can tell people, hey, being a racist is bad. But generally, people are not going to abandon racist behavior unless it's something that they personally develop a sense of some skin in the game with that. That tends to be more of an internal process. So, if you have a chance, check it out. It's not long, and I think that this is something that we need to think about going forward, is not always feeling the need to respond to everything, or thinking more critically about, well, what are some things we actually ought to be responsive to, and then some things that just absolutely don't deserve our attention at all. So, inshallah, that's something that I put up, and maybe perhaps we can have a further discussion, either through the comments on the Substack, or I'll probably upload this to the YouTube channel as well. So, all right. Assalamu alaikum.